Take your Bibles, please, and turn to Matthew chapter 25. And while you are looking for that passage, I'm going to ask Veronica if she'll come and read it to us. Matthew chapter 25, we're going to start at verse 14, and we'll continue to the end of verse 30. So Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30.
From the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received 5 talents went and traded them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of the servants came and settled the accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and bought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you have delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained another 5 beside them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant, for you are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And he also who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talents in the ground. Look, here you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy servant, you knew that I have reaped where I have not sown, and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Therefore you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talents from him, and give it to the one who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into utter darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Thank you, Veronica. Imagine tonight that you were walking through a lovely garden. As you walked and enjoyed this garden, you noticed in the center of the garden was an ugly-looking scarecrow. And as you looked at the scarecrow, you paid attention to how it was dressed. And the scarecrow had these worn-out overalls on with holes in the knees, and they were droopy, and they were faded, and one of the straps was broken. And then you noticed that the arms were all ragged and just stiff as a board, full of straw, and maybe an old plaid shirt on. And then you notice that my earpiece just fell off, and can't find it, and we'll have to go on without that. And you notice that the hat that the scarecrow had on was tilted, almost like a drunk person had just come from the bar and just shoved this hat on, and it was all disfigured. And then you noticed the face. It was the ugliest, meanest, most sinister-looking face that you'd ever seen on a scarecrow. And as you notice the scarecrow, you also notice that below this scarecrow lay a beautiful patch of strawberries. On the scarecrow were sitting 2 blackbirds, one on each of the outstretched arm of the scarecrow, licking their lips. Do birds have lips? Licking their beaks, anticipating one more shot at those lovely strawberries just below the scarecrow. But not all the birds were enjoying this opportunity, because there were birds sitting around this patch of strawberries. Some were in the treetops, some were on the fence posts, all looking and longing to be a participant in this big feast that lay just in front of them. Some on the telephone wires, hoping that one day soon they can enjoy what the two blackbirds had already done, is enjoyed a supper of strawberries. The question is, why did they participate? Why were they staying away at a distance? Because it was a terrible thing in the garden that kept them from doing what they wanted to do. The same is the story about the three men we just read. These three characters are unique. In fact, we know the story, and we're not going to go through it in detail, but the master came and gave them each an opportunity. And I want you to notice, and if you looked in my Bible, you notice that there are some words and phrases that are circled and squared and highlighted. But I want you to notice in verse 15, and to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. 2 of them we're proud of. 2 of them showed dedication, showed commitment, showed that they were excited and wanted to do something for their master. They showed work, and they showed a profit. And so we're excited and we're glad and we're proud of them, of having taken what the master had given them and accomplished something of benefit. And then on the day of reckoning, on the day of accountability, they have something tangible to present to the master. But the person who had 1 talent, we're ashamed of him. We pity him, because he took what was given to him and he shows no efforts. He shows no concern. He shows no care in taking what was given to him and accomplishing anything that already was. He doesn't care about hearing praise from the master. And on the day of accountability, when the master comes and asks him and inquires him what has happened to what was given to him, he says, well, just here it is. So the question is, what's the difference between these 3 men and the birds that are sitting on the scarecrow? I want you to imagine with me back to the birds now. And they're looking longingly at this strawberry patch, and they see the two blackbirds sitting on the arms of the scarecrow. But yet the ones on the fence post, the ones on the telephone wire are talking to themselves. And the conversation may go something like this. Have you had any berries this morning? No, sorry, haven't had any berries this morning. Well, how come? Maybe it's been too hot out and the heat has dried up all the strawberries. No, it's nice day out. Well, is it because it was a heavy frost last night and it killed all the plants? No frost last night. Well, how come you haven't gone down there and enjoyed the berries? Have yourself some dessert. They're looking good. And so the one bird turns to the other and he says, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of that thing that stands right in the middle of the strawberry patch. But the berries are only 50 feet away. I know. But that scares me. Do you see how mean he looks? Do you see how ugly his face is? I just can't go down there. I'm afraid. You see, the problem really is the same, isn't it? Because the bird has allowed something in the middle of the strawberry patch to rob him of an opportunity he has that lay in front of him, but he wouldn't take it. And so he sits on the fence posts, he sits in the treetops, he sits in the telephone wires, and he starves. Not because there's no food, not because there's a famine, but because he's afraid of something. This is the same type of mentality that the man with one talent had. You see, he was given a talent. He was given an opportunity. He was given a privilege. And he didn't take advantage of it because he was afraid. In fact, I want you to notice that it says what it says there in let's go back to verse 19. It says there that the master went away for a long time. So all three men had an opportunity. It doesn't say how long it was, but there was plenty of opportunity to take what the master had given him and accomplish something and increase it and use it. And then it comes to the day when the man with one talent is called into accountability. And he says this in verse 24. And when he who had received one talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed, and I was afraid. The reason I didn't take what you have, what you gave me, is because I was afraid. And so being afraid, I did nothing at all with the opportunity that you gave me. I wrote down a couple things here that I think that probably could have played a factor in why this man with one talent was afraid. And number one here, I put, he compared himself to others. He compared himself to others. I'm imagining in my mind that the master called the first one in and gave him the 5 talents, and the first one left, and maybe, I don't know, a half hour, an hour later, he calls the second one in and gives them the second 3 talents, and he leaves. And then finally he calls the last one and gives him 1 talent. And I can imagine again in my mind, the Bible doesn't record this, but the ones that had gotten talents before were standing outside saying, man, the master gave us, entrusted to us these talents. These are opportunities. How can we do to make him happy? What can we do to invest to please him? And the one who had received his 1 talent comes walking out, and the other 2 are standing there, and he says, well, what'd you guys get? And they said, well, I got this amount, and he said, well, I only got 1. I only got 1. Notice it says back in verse 19, he gave them everyone according to his ability. I only got 1. And so there's just no way that I'm ever going to live up to what you guys can do. So, because you guys have more talents than I do, he trusts you more, then I'm just not going to do anything with what he's given me. You know, I wonder in our lives and even in our churches if we develop the same attitude. Oh, there's other people that can do better. Oh, if I could only sing as good as so-and-so. Oh, if I could only preach as good as this person. Oh, if I only had as much money as that, then I could really do big things for God. Oh, if I could only be a servant, like I could be hospitable like this person or that individual. So I can't do that. I can't measure up, so I'm just going to do nothing at all. If we had all these things, then we could really, if I had more money, Lord, then I could really turn this world upside down. In fact, I was telling my wife this afternoon of a story I remember. Remember years ago we went to a church, and in this church was a young man called Dave. And Dave came to me after one of the services, I guess, and he says, look, I've been presented with a business venture, and I wanted your opinion on it and to see what you think. And he wouldn't tell me the name of the business venture. So I agreed to go with him. I think it was a Thursday night. It doesn't really matter. But I agreed to go with him to this meeting and then share with him some of my thoughts. And I shared this idea with my wife, and she says, oh, I just don't like this. This just doesn't sound that good. Anyway, I fulfilled my obligation and went with him. And 3.5 hours later at an Amway presentation. But listen, my point isn't Amway. But David said to me, he said, if only I made some more money, I could give it to missions. If only. I can't do anything now because I just haven't been blessed like other people have. But if I were, I would do a lot more. And so we become like other people. We just sit there and saying, there's nothing for me to do because I just don't have the resources and abilities that God has blessed others with. You know, this is the same scarecrow that kept the 10 spies from entering the land that God had promised them. Remember the story? They sent 12. 2 came back and said, yeah, we can do this. 10 says, we looked and we saw in our own eyes we were merely grasshoppers. They are so big. They are so ugly. They're worse than the scarecrows. There's no way we can ever do that. And as a result, they wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years without seeing God do great things. I wrote this down here. It might encourage you, might stick in your mind. I put this down. More people fail because they believe they are underestimated, or they underestimate themselves by overestimating themselves. More people fail because they believe they underestimate themselves more than overestimate themselves. And folks, when you start comparing yourself and your situation and your abilities and your talents and your money and all of these things to other people, you will probably get into the situation whereby you say, well, it's just not worth it. There's nothing I can do. The second thing I wrote down here is he considered his circumstances. The man that came had 1 talent, considered his circumstances. And that's connected to the first thing. Not only do we compare ourselves to other people, we look at our situation. If only I didn't live in my apartment. If only I had another job. If only I was married. If only I was single. If only so many other my situations changed. Then I could serve God. Then I could be a force to be reckoned with. But as long as I'm in this situation, there's nothing I can do. And so the strawberries sit in the field and the crows never get an opportunity to taste them, even though they're just at their feet. And they say to themselves, well, maybe next year is going to be a better crop. Maybe I'll do it next year. I'm not going to do it this year, but next year is going to be better. And so in our own lives, we rationalize that, yes, it's not good for me financially this year, but maybe next year I'll give more, I'll invest more, I'll give more to missions, and it's always put off. So when the servant is called into accountability, all he has is excuses and delays. The question is, what excuse do we have for not using what God has given us? Here are some popular excuses that may ring true in your situation. Number one, the church is too big. I can't do anything. The church is way too big. Or how about this one? The church is too small. It's just too small. There's not opportunities for me to serve. There are too many things to do. There's nothing for a person my age to do. I don't want to become overwhelmed. People won't appreciate me. I will get criticized. And let me tell you, no matter if you do anything or you don't do anything, you're going to get criticized. So we might as well get criticized doing something. I have down here, and I think this is kind of cute. If criticism had any effect, the skunk would be extinct by now. The third thing I wrote, he had no confidence in his master. Notice verse 24, he says there, then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man. I didn't think you would give me a fair shake. I don't trust you. I don't think you have my best interest at your heart. You're not a fair and just man. And the last thing I wrote down here. Before we go to the last thing, don't you think that's an insult to God? Don't you think the master was insulted? Notice it says back in verse 18, this was the master's money. He didn't give it to the man and said, look, this is your money, you can do with what. He says, no, this is my money. I want you to invest it for my purpose so that you can get a reward. And then he comes down in verse 24, oh, you're such a mean man. You're not fair. You don't deal with me fair. And so the man gets condemned, not because he wasn't worthy, not because the master didn't like him, but because he blew an opportunity that was presented to him. And he lost out. Here's the number 4 thing I wrote down. He was afraid of failure. Afraid of failure. So the blackbirds sit on the wire and say to each other, boy, those berries look good. Boy, I'd like some. I'm really hungry. But I can't go down there because what happens if I fail? What happens if that scarecrow gets me? And so I just sit there looking at the 2 blackbirds that are enjoying all the berries they can have, and they're going down for seconds and thirds in a few minutes when they finish digesting what they've already had, longing to be like them, but afraid to fly in the face of danger. I wrote down this, and I put, it is easier to teach someone doing wrong the wrong thing to do the right thing. It is easier to teach someone doing the wrong thing to do the right thing than someone to do something when they're doing nothing. Please don't ask me to read that again. And in verse 26, let's read verses 26 to 28. But his Lord answered and said to him, notice what he calls him, wicked and lazy. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers. And at my coming, you knew I was coming. Yes, it was a long time, but you knew there was a day of accountability. I would have received back mine own with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has more will be given, and he will and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has is taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what can we do? What does this all mean? First of all, let me put it to you simply. We all have scarecrows, and they are real. Let us not make light of scarecrows. They are intimidating. Your scarecrow may not be in a strawberry patch, but it's things that we face that we're afraid of. My daughter, maybe a couple months ago, I was talking to her, and she says, Dad, she attends Jarvis Street Baptist Church in Toronto, and she says, they asked me to get involved in a women's conference. She says, I've never done anything like that before. I've never done anything like that. I said, well, how did it go? She says, well, it was kind of scary at first, but I kind of enjoyed it. Look for your scarecrows. There's always something for us to do. I was mentioning this afternoon to my wife, I asked her if she remembered a little fella called Charles Carpenter. Charles was about 9 or 10 years old. He came to the pastor one day and he says, Pastor, he said, I'd like to do something. What do you tell a 9 or 10-year-old? What can they do? I'd like to do something in the church, something of service, something that I can do. So after a while, I don't know if it was the next day or whatever, he came up with an idea, and the pastor said, Charles, here's what you can do. After each communion, it's your job to go and make sure all the plastic disposable cups are picked up. You know how people leave them in there? And you make sure that all the bulletins are picked up from the chairs. You know how people leave? And they're dirty Kleenexes. And if you want to create a project, maybe I could suggest you leave some dirty Kleenexes around so somebody comes. And you know what? That was his talent. That was something he could get involved in at 9 or 10 or 11 years old. What's your scarecrow? Oh, I could never sing. Well, maybe you don't have to. Oh, I love kids, but man, I could never keep up with them. Well, we've got drugs for that. But maybe there are opportunities for you to get involved in some way in kids' ministries. Oh, I would love to have people over, but my house isn't as great. And I got this old chippy silverware and dinnerware and Tupperware and all this other things. Oh, well, hold on. Maybe those are your scarecrows. Maybe you should buy yourself new dinner. Well, I'm teasing you, but you know what I mean? We all have things that confront us that we're scared of. So here's what I wrote down about scarecrows. Number one, look for them. Look for them. Because a scarecrow is an indication of something desirable. You never see a scarecrow on somebody's lawn. You never see a scarecrow in untilled soil. Untilled soil. You never see a scarecrow in a desert. You know why? Because there's nothing desirable there. Look for scarecrows. Because a scarecrow is an indication to something desirable. And the very fact that there's a scarecrow there may mean the very fact the task is difficult and it's going to require you to make a difficult commitments. Secondly, face your scarecrows. It's interesting that the birds will never enjoy the strawberries until they face and are willing to fly in the face of the scarecrow. They look at such a mean face. They're intimidated by such a mean persona. But they don't know that a scarecrow can't hurt them. You know, scarecrows can't hurt you. They can intimidate you. It's like when you're walking down the sidewalk and your shadow's about 12 feet long. You know, if you got this little poodle, the little poodle looks like it's about 9 feet long and it looks pretty big. But it can't bite you. A shadow can't bite you. A shadow can't kill you. A scarecrow is just merely a persona that we have, that something is intimidating to us. It takes courage to move beyond where we are, isn't it? Doesn't it, as individuals? One of the common excuses for people that we've heard of, and I guess it's a lingo language, but people say, well, that's not my comfort zone. You ever heard that? Comfort zone. Let me tell you this about comfort zones. We all move out of our comfort zone at all times in life. Let me give you an example. Before you were born, the stomach was your comfort zone. After you were born, this world seems strange. It seems intimidating. It seems scary, but you adjust to that. Graduating, going from high school into university, that's not your comfort zone, but after a few weeks, after a few months in university, all of a sudden you've got a new comfort zone. Getting married, first of all, you're in the state of singleness, and now you're married to someone else, and that's not your comfort zone, but after a few months, after a few years, after 40 years, it becomes your comfort zone. Retirements. You've worked all your life, and that's your comfort zone. Now you're at the stage of life where you're establishing a new comfort zones are all happening all the time. So I think that's just a bunch of crock. I think that's an excuse. It's not my comfort. If it's not, make it your comfort zone. And do something with the abilities and the opportunities and the resources that God has given you. One of the reasons the blackbirds sit on the fence is because they didn't take and understood what lay at their feet. And we're afraid that when we start to go in things in different directions, we start to invest our time and our talent and money, that things are going to backfire. You know what? We're afraid of failure. Failure. What are people going to say if I believe that God has given me the ability to music and I muff it up? You know what I would say? Great, you're just like us. You know, we all goof it up, don't we? We pick the wrong number, we sing the wrong verse, we do it all the time. But the more you do it, it becomes your comfort zone. We're terrified of it. You know, another thing we're terrified of is death. In fact, that kind of scarecrow scares us, doesn't it? David wrote in Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the what? The shadow. Shadows can't hurt you. They can be intimidating. They look large, but it can't hurt you. Shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. So 2 men took what the master had given them. They invested. I don't know what they invested in, and it doesn't really matter. But when the day of accountability came, they had something
positive to present to the master. And he rewarded them greatly. One man said, I can't be bothered. There's too many obstacles. It's too much work. There's too much effort. The master won't treat me fair. And as a result, the master came back and says, you wicked and lazy servants. And he took the very thing that he had given them and gave it to someone else. You see, it had nothing to do with which man the master liked better than the other. It had nothing to do with the fact that the master was playing favorites. It had everything to do with the man's lack of initiative to take opportunity, to take advantage of what the master had given him. And he left him with nothing. So the question this evening is, what are your scarecrows? What are the things that you believe God has given you, but yet you look at your situation where you are now? You might be a single parent. You might have just lost your loved one, your husband or wife, and you sit there and say, well, what can I do? How can I get involved? God has given me time. He's given me resources. He's given me opportunities to use these things to accomplish greater things. And man, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be hard, but I can get in there with the young people. I can minister in ways that God will use me to bless others. And we need more people to look for opportunities. Because if not, we're just going to die dreaming and hoping and longing for the strawberries like the blackbirds were. Let's pray. Father, again, we realize that there are so many people in our church, I guess, and maybe even here tonight, that really haven't done anything with the abilities and the opportunities that you have given them. Would you remind us of a couple things? Number one, that these abilities and opportunities come from you, and that we are to use them to minister to others so that we bring honor and glory to you. May you also help us to realize that there is a day of accounting, a day of accountability. Help us to be diligent in serving you and serving others. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to ask Ron to come lead us in our last song, please. Hymn number 597, Take My Life and Let It Be Consecrated, Lord, to Thee. 597.